I've always wondered when people refer to a culture as like, oh, they have a really strong culture there and there. What does it actually
does a strong culture
mean?
mean?
Is it like it's very clear and everyone behaves the same and everyone knows what to expect? Is that a strong culture? Is a strong culture? Do people use that to reference to it's a great culture? It's good. Like everyone wants to work there. Because I can, and then you have like toxic cultures where I would tend to believe that that's a form of a strong culture too, but probably not what you want. And a colleague of ours always references this company that she used to work with, where she was a consultant and worked with this company 10 years ago and then 10 years later again. And there were certain things that even though the whole leadership team has shifted, their whole business strategy had changed, that kind of notion of like, if you book a meeting with a VP of another department, you cannot show up without the VP of your own department, which that to me is an example of a very strong culture that I don't necessarily have an opinion on whether that's good or bad, but just an example of how cultures can be so strong that it kind of, that they outlive leadership changes, strategy changes, things like that.
Yeah.
I do think the real question is, where does a strong culture, in the sense of like, it's clear everyone kind of behaves a certain way, it outlives changes, where does that stop serving you potentially? Where can it get too rigid?
Yeah. That's a great question. And just going back to that VP example, like I think of in a couple of places I've worked, this concept of like first team and second team is like been very core to their culture, right? If like you have your first team, your peer group, and who you report to, that is your first team and your first culture. And then you have your second team, which is the second one. So it just that example is like, oh, it's kind of like that first team, second team culture, or that like live model, laterally integrate before you vertically execute. But those are all examples of routines or habits or things that will live beyond. And I wonder if it's still happening now that I think back on it. But yeah, that the question that you ask, the messy middle piece keeps coming back to me, right? And I reflected, in advance of this, of like various corporate cultures that I've been a part of. Ones with our clients where you get to temporarily be a part of it, which is a really fun part of our job, that you get to like have these little moments where you get to embed yourself and be part of a different group. But I think there's this tension in what I would call coherence, while also being very open. So coherence being is your culture rooted in your vision and why you guys exist as an organization? Is there a level of predictability that everybody knows what's expected of them and how they contribute to that and what positive behavior or contributions look like to doing that? And do you have a positive reinforcing cycle to reinforce those things? Which again, doesn't have to be a leader standing up there saying those things. Like I've seen it where anybody can be part of creating that. So that's a coherence piece, which to me is about belonging, consistency, united, stronger together kind of piece. But then I think that rigidity piece, if you're too much that's where you become too rigid and the culture might be left behind or hold you back from something or backfire on you. The other side to me is this openness that allows for that adaptability, flexibility, innovation. But you can't just show up and be like, we are an open culture. Like that drives me nuts when I hear that. There are some key pieces around trust in your culture that has to be the table stakes for that to happen. And I do find, and I've probably been guilty of it, so come at me in the comments, of like this speaking out of both sides of your mouth, right? Of like, we are adaptable, we are flexible, we are innovative, a culture of experimentation, but there is not a foundation of trust that anyone feels safe enough to speak up, that their opinions will be heard, their different perspectives are being welcomed. So how do you get that level of psychological safety, trust? I think of the trust quotient in there. How do you embrace your organization on that? So I think those are two pieces. If you can keep them together, you won't fall into this pitfall of being too rigid and things will move past you.
Yeah. So coherence and openness.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you were speaking, I was also thinking the rigidity could also come in, like, and we'll get to that probably a bit later when we kind of unfold, like, how do you keep a culture alive, or in what components does it show up? But if you hire people that fit perfectly with your culture and you have your culture defined very, like, in a very rigid way, then there is a bit of that risk of hiring all the same people, right? Like, where's your diversity of thought or kind of your inclusion?
Yeah.
So I see that as a bit of a risk too. The openness, I think, also really, to me, feeds into that notion of adaptability, right? So it is, sure, some things are really defining your organization and align with your purpose and your strategy, but then is there enough openness or space to evolve with the world around us? And research shows that, and it's Cotter and Haskett who did this research, that adaptive cultures outperform rigid ones by 4 times.
Wow.
So gets us into that space of, like, why are we even talking about culture?
Right.
Which I think, in my mind, it's a bit about employee engagement, which I think is always the obvious connection that's made. It's about customer satisfaction and kind of a customer loyalty, and then business performance at large. Like, another stat that I found, or that McKinsey found, I found that McKinsey found, is that inclusive cultures are 36% more profitable. So that's kind of all around the business performance side of it. Then there is kind of, I think, the employee engagement side, another research more on the negative side, like toxic cultures are 10 times more predictable of turnover than pay salaries, which we always tend to think, like, is what draws people out. But yeah, so culture can really work against you if it's not right. What I loved seeing in examples is kind of Wealthsimple, and then it's looking at culture more from a, like, industry perspective, like the financial industry. I don't think has been known for their flexibility and openness and wellness and kind of giving everyone a voice. And Wealthsimple, to me, is an example that really, really broke through that, despite the culture in the industry. And I don't know enough about how they did it. I would be curious kind of to dive into that a little bit more, because how are you going to attract the very same finance people that worked in that industry for years and then together work in this whole new context? So you really have to shape the right conditions for people to feel safe enough and to open up about things like wellness and to create that flexibility and not the 90-hour work weeks type of thing, right? Yeah. So I really admire, and I would be curious to learn more how they did it, but I do know they did do it.
And there's still the greater scheme of things, like a young organization, right? Yeah. So I'm curious to follow their journey as well, going through it. And I do love the connection to culture does equal business performance. So if you're an organization that's a big part of your culture and what's important to you, like, it's great to see that, right? More productive, better revenue results, lower turnover, less stress. Like, think about that as the place you want to work, right? Like, you're doing well and you're having fun and you're not feeling stressed about it. Like, that sounds pretty cool, right? So it sounds like it's
also
worth
not
investing
the ping pong
in.
Tables and
ping pong tables, free lunch.
Where it is.
I mean, those are nice too from time to time. But and another example that comes to mind that I'm just, like, such a huge fan of this organization. It feels weird calling it an organization, but Four Seasons, like the hotel chain, right? They're Canadian, so gotta represent. Wish I could go to Four Seasons more often, but they're too expensive for me. But I've been at one twice, and it was incredible. But I think they have a book about the Golden Rule principle, and maybe I read it 15, 20 years ago when I first started in a customer service role, and our leader was like, we want to, let's read this. We don't have to have the Golden Rule ourselves, but, like, listen in a customer service team, which sometimes in a customer service team, you feel like the afterthought in the greater organization. Like, we play a pivotal role in this. What do we want our team culture to be? And so their big mantra was around the golden rule.
Yeah.
Do unto others as you would have do unto you. Sounds familiar. Pretty simple, but it works, right? And they really, focused on how do we create that culture of trust with our team? We're in the service industry, that every single person, no matter what your position is, you feel like you have the runway to do what you need to do to make that guest stay 10 times better.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask anybody. You just do it. We trust your judgment, right? And from there, the benefits on the internal trust of like delivering incredible service, people staying around, like they are a huge, very popular chain known for these experiences. And then you look at the external trust that was created of customer loyalty. People will move mountains to have their type of experiences. Like I think there's something quite powerful in that example and how simplistic it was. Their culture came down to the golden rule, which is pretty cool.
I think that's an amazing example, especially kind of how it connects also to like customer loyalty, right? So it is kind of connecting that internal and external world. And in its simplicity, I think it's how I would define a strong culture. Like I'm sure it survived or like it still exists. So there must have been leadership changes. There must have been strategic choices that were made differently. But this is the thing that kind of kept being their number one thing driving their culture. The how they do it or how everyone does it is so open that everyone can kind of give their own interpretation to it, but it leads to the same thing. So I think there's, again, that kind of adaptability from a role to role, person to person within that, and a strong alignment with their vision and strategy. So I think maybe that brings us to like, a culture is not something that you just create once and for all.
Not a crock pot. You don't set it and forget it.
It kind of needs to be strong enough to mean something, but also adaptable enough to kind of allow for that openness that we talked about.
And you go to like the past 5 years and the 65% that have changed. And I'm curious to know how many of them came through the other side and would say they're stronger as an organization, better performance, and was the ability that what their culture was at the beginning and whatever it adapted to is what got them through it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like maybe there's a research study for us in there.
Yeah.